Hi everyone, Soviet Bear here. So, I decided to make a video about myself and tell you guys how I became a Russian Eurasianist and Russian great power nationalist. You won't believe this. I guarantee you will not. That I used to be a pro-Western Euro-Integrationist liberal. Yes, it's true. I used to believe that Russia's place is in the European Union. Oh my god! Yes, I don't believe it either now. Okay, I don't know how it came up. And just, okay, you might ask me, how did I get to where I am today? So let me tell you my story. So let's say 10 or 12 years ago, I was convinced that Russia belongs in the European Union, and maybe even possibly in NATO. Yes, I didn't understand politics and geopolitics that during that time. I was too young. So I really did believe that Russia, or I mean Europe and USA, will accept Russia as equals. We just need to grow economically and to improve our economy. So yeah, I don't believe it now. But so I didn't, pay attention when NATO expanded to the east and absorbed the Baltic states, because I didn't really think that NATO is a hostile alliance to Russia. Yes, I used to believe that NATO is a friendly to Russia. I didn't pay attention when the first Maidan, the so-called Orange Revolution in Ukraine, occurred. I just thought that it was just Ukrainians protesting against the president. They didn't want the same president, so they were protesting. I didn't know anything about George Soros and the and the color revolution tactics of the USA. So, how did my transformation begin? It began in 2008 after the Russia-Georgia war. Well, a war because of South Ossetia and Abkhazia. The former Georgian president Mikhail Saakashvili, who is now a governor of Odessa Oblast in the junta-occupied Ukraine. So he was a president of the Georgia in 2008, and he launched a perfidious attack against South Ossetia. He shelled Tskhinval, the capital of South Ossetia, with the Grad MLRS. And of course, our peacekeepers, the Russian peacekeepers, were also hit. So we had to retaliate and to protect peaceful South Ossetian people and our peacekeepers. Of course, our army crushed the pathetic small Georgian army, albeit it was trained by NATO and armed by USA and Israel, but we crushed it. So yeah, then my transformation began. I was starting to realize that NATO, EU and USA are not so friendly. Indeed, they were unfriendly. But I really didn't think that Russia is powerful and was powerful enough to stand up against NATO. Also, I didn't really think that China is going to be an ally of Russia, like it is now. But anyway, let's continue. So also, I paid attention to the NATO expansion to the east. Yeah, so in 2008 and 2009, NATO was actually ready to absorb Georgia and Ukraine. and Ukraine started trying to mess up relations with Russia because of the Russian Black Sea Navy in Sevastopol, in Crimea. So I paid attention to NATO expansion and, of course, the deployment of NATO's missile defense shield in Eastern Europe. Now, okay, NATO was pushing this ridiculous, bogus propaganda that these missiles are intended to defend Europe from the Iranian alleged intercontinental ballistic missiles. But if you really want to, protect Europe from Iran, wouldn't it make more sense to deploy missile defense shield in Turkey, which is a part of NATO, or in Georgia, where US puppet state is in power, or in Azerbaijan, which is in close proximity to Iran? In fact, we, Russia, offered the Gabala radar stations to NATO in order to monitor Iran from Azerbaijan territory, not from Eastern Europe. But NATO refused. Also, NATO absolutely refused to give Russia any written guarantees that their missile shield is not intended against Russia's nuclear arsenal. But NATO refused it. So we had to deploy our Iskander hypersonic ballistic missiles to protect our borders and our airspace and our nuclear arsenal from NATO missile defense, from NATO anti-air missiles. Yes, that's what we had to do. Also, when the so-called Arab Spring began, I started to become, more and more, suspicious, and I didn't, I ceased to trust the United States and NATO and the EU when they were destabilizing the Middle East. And after they bombed Iraq and Afghanistan, I also disapproved of these actions when they overthrew Saddam Hussein and then just they executed him, and this trial process was actually a big, a shit show. So when they tried to destabilize Egypt and the entire Middle East with a series of color revolutions, and they overthrew Gaddafi, they actually, Gaddafi was overthrown and we didn't do anything about it. But Libya and Gaddafi is a different story. I want to talk more about Syria. So Syria is our last ally in the Middle East. At least they remained our last ally in the Middle East. Syria didn't betray us even when Russia had tough times in the 1990s. And Syria was probably is probably the only country who called the Chechen terrorists actually terrorists, not some martyrs or mujahideen or whatever. So we had to protect Assad, and I absolutely supported Vladimir Putin and Russia's veto in the UN. We many times vetoed the NATO and US intervention in Syria because we knew if Assad gets toppled, then the radical extremists seize power in Syria, and then it is all going to Russia. It will all go to Russia to try to destabilize Russia. So, but then, when the Euromaidan in Ukraine broke out, I began to absolutely, hate and despise NATO, EU, and the US foreign policy and their values. And after the Crimea-Russia reunion, I was, I felt so determined. I said to myself that Putin is the only way. He is the only leader able to lead us during these dark and dangerous times. So there is no alternative to him right now. And I must do whatever it takes to prevent the Ukrainian scenario, the Kiev scenario in Moscow. So basically, I was a patriot before it. I was a radical, patriot before it became trend in Russia, and patriotism became a trend after the Sochi Winter Olympic Games and the Crimea reunification. But I was a patriot way before it, and I made some interviews. So how did my interview, career on YouTube begin? I met a blogger, a YouTube blogger, 108 Morris 108. I made comments under his videos, and one day he personal messaged me, and he asked me, will you make a Skype interview? Well, of course, then I bought my webcam, and we made an interview, and then we made another interview and another, and then I started my YouTube channel called Soviet Belarus, and I start make my own videos. So yeah, and right now, as you can see, with all that's going on, and my eyes are opened, I can see that the idea of Russian integration in the EU is absolutely preposterous. And the idea of integration of Russia in NATO is even more ridiculous, because if Russia is integrated in NATO, then NATO wouldn't make sense at all, because it was intended against Soviet Union, aka Russia. So just yes, I'm glad that now my eyes are opened. Yes, 10 years ago I thought that the cooperation with the West is the only way. It is the only way to get to the stars, to Alpha Centauri. Well, now I think that Russian Eurasianist cooperation with China, with India, the Eurasian Union is the only way. That doesn't mean I want to cut all ties with Europe and to build a new Iron Curtain. No, 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 no. I want also Europe to be integrated with Russia and with China in this integration with the Eurasian Union and with China and with BRICS. But it's only possible when USA loses its grip on Europe. The USA must lose its grip on Europe in order for that to be accomplished. So yeah, Europe united under the under the leadership of Russia and China sounds really good. Yeah, and I'm now very staunch, Eurasianist and anti-Atlanticist. Well, if you guys want to ask me what do I think about the peace talks in Syria, I think they will fail any just like all those previous peace talks in Syria, because the US goal is to get Assad, and Russia must not allow to balkanize Syria. Syria must retain its territorial integrity. Yeah, So I know many people from the West are watching me right now, and I advise you guys to wake up and to no most of the people who are watching me have already woken up, but still other people must wake up and realize that Russia is not an evil empire, China is not an evil empire, and India is not an evil empire. The only evil empire is NATO and the Atlanticist alliance of EU and USA. Now, that doesn't mean that I hate all of the US people, of the European people. No, it is not true. I know there are a lot of people in America, I mean in the USA and in European countries that don't hate Russia, that don't drink the Western media Kool-Aid, anti-Russian Kool-Aid. So what I do hate is the Atlanticism, their foreign policy, their aggressive expansion to the east, and their Russophobia and their arrogant attitude towards Russia. Also, their political correctness, obsession with sexual perversions, and social justice warriors, and the war on masculinity. This Western neo-feminist war on masculinity and real men. So, if you Russophobes are watching me right now, I want to say once again that we, Russia, are sovereign, strong, and proud nations. We cannot be coerced by economic measures. We cannot be contained militarily. We cannot be subdued by pressure. We cannot be kept in check. We have our own national interests, and we are ready to fight for those interests, to fight in all senses of this word, including a real war. And from as far as I know, according to the most recent poll, 90% of Russians trust their army. And we actually think our army is good and it can protect us and protect our interests. No, I really hope the global war will not happen. So, that is all, guys. Soviet Bear out.